Where's it gone? There it is. Hello, good evening, everyone. So we're going to be talking about boundary changes today, ahead of the general election, which is the big one now. The local elections out the way. I may go over a couple of other things related to the local elections as well, just to finish off. Because obviously, as I said, it took us some days to get the results, and then you start to do some analysis, and then the real statisticians do some proper analysis, and that all takes much longer to come through, and will no doubt be carrying on for some time. But I thought I would discuss boundary changes today, because in terms of how the Conservatives aim to try and nick the next election, we obviously they're going to do it in the old-fashioned way. They're going to try and convince voters that somehow a Labour government would be worse than a government with them. Or at the moment, they're actually trying to say that the idea of a Labour-Lib Dem coalition would be absolutely awful. Good luck with that one. We know about the voter suppression. What we don't know is exactly what the impact of it is. I don't just mean in terms of scale. It's quite clear a lot of people had their votes effectively stolen. There's two key things we don't know, though, is first of all, did it end up hurting Labour more than the Conservatives? Because that's the intention from the point of view of the Conservatives. Did it end up hurting, I suppose, the Lib Dems as well, to an extent? Did it end up hurting their opponents more than them? Or did it not, in which case they might as well have not done it? And the second thing we don't know, now that it's happened, now that people have got it into their heads that their vote has been basically nicked, is there going to be a real push for people to make sure they have the right ID for next year? In other words, was this a bit of a warning shot which will reduce the level of voter suppression as a result of this next one? Em saying that I can't see a Lib Lab coalition happening, can you? So there's realistically zero chance of a Labour Liberal Democrat coalition, not because they won't work with each other, but because the numbers won't be there. Well, first of all, at the moment, I'll show you in a bit anyway, at the moment, Labour are on for a large, really too large a majority. But let us say it was a hung parliament territory. The Liberal Democrats are not going to win enough seats. It's not like in 2010, where they had like 50 seats. It's not going to be like that. The Liberal Democrats will do well to get 20 or 25 seats, something like that. And the thing about it is, for the Liberal Democrats to do better than that, it really means the Conservatives have to do worse. And if the Conservatives do worse, then Labour will also do better, and it'll drive them home. So under no realistic circumstances can the Liberal Democrats really have enough seats to form a coalition. That doesn't mean to say they couldn't form an alliance. Bear in mind, we have two alliances already. In Holyrood, in the Scottish Parliament, we have the SNP and the Scottish Greens working in alliance. They're not in coalition. The SNP occupy all of the government positions. The SNP do not occupy, the Greens, the Scottish Greens, do not occupy any positions in the Scottish government, but they have formed an alliance to work on policies of common interest. The same thing has happened in Wales in the Senate. Labour occupy all of the government positions, but Plaid are working with Labour in Wales on, again, a common legislative programme. So they're working in an alliance. So the same sort of thing could happen here as well. But in terms of an actual coalition, no. But let's have a look. So what we've gone... Boundary changes was the thing that the Conservatives have also tried to do to stack the odds in their favour. So I want to look at what it is, what they've done, or what they're still... technically, it's still to be done, but will be done for the next election, and whether it's going to work or not. So this is a summary of the changes. I think this is up to date. So straight away, you can see... It includes adding 10 extra constituencies to England, nicking 2 off Scotland and nicking 8 off Wales. Northern Ireland, no change. Well, they don't care about Northern Ireland because the Conservatives don't have seats in Northern... They don't win seats in Northern Ireland anyway. So straight away you look at that and go, So the nation within the UK that mostly votes Conservative is getting 10 extra seats. The ones that don't are losing seats. How interesting. So then you look at where the gains and losses are in England. So the gains are in the East, quite a lot of Tory voting areas there. The East Midlands, London. Okay, London is not a big Tory voting area. Although I haven't actually checked exactly where the extra ones are popping up. It could be that they've effectively split a Tory area into two Tory areas. So it could still be, because there are some parts of London that vote Tory. The South East, which is, of course, their heartlands, the South East is absolutely the Conservatives' home ground. And the South West, where they get a lot as well. And you look at where they've lost. North East doesn't vote Conservative, really. North West absolutely doesn't vote Conservative. West Midlands, again, not so much Conservative. So the places where you're looking at... So again, it's although there will be a rationale to it, there is a rationale to it in terms of making constituencies roughly the same size, and they can absolutely justify it. Nonetheless, the impact has been to create more seats in Tory voting regions and take seats away from regions that tend not to vote Conservative. But I'm going to come on to whether it's actually going to work for them in a moment. Do I know anything about which constituencies changes? They are published. So if you want to look up your own constituency, you can see it published. But I don't have a photographic memory of it. I know my constituency is changing. So my constituency at the moment is called Brigham Goole. That's disappearing. My bit of it is going to go over into part of Doncaster, which will probably vote Labour. Well, almost certainly vote Labour, in fact. Give me some hope, Phil. Been hearing from Labour in the media has begun to start disenfranchising me. Give me some hope. Certainly. Well, it depends what sort of hope you want. Now, let us have a look at the impact of this. So let us see, first of all, let's go to this one. Now, this is electoral calculus uses the MRP model. It's proved, YouGov have proved its worth in the past couple of general elections. It doesn't mean to say that this one is absolutely spot on, but it is using a valid way of translating voting intention polls into actual voting intention by seat basis. It's quite clever. And this was what it was like at the end of April. This is back in time at the end of April. It was predicting a likely Labour majority of 168. Now, if you go onto Electoral Calculus's website, this is still there. They haven't actually updated it. However, they did tweet an update with the new boundary changes. I don't know why they've not put it on their website yet. I'm assuming they're going to wait, or at least the main part of it. I'm assuming they're going to wait until the boundary changes are definitely in before they change it on their like shop window type thing. But they tweeted what it would look like with the boundary changes. Obviously a couple of weeks later, so after the local elections as well. And it looks like this. I'm just going to get rid of this. And it looks like this. So what has happened with... Now, it's not because of the boundary changes. It's also because of the recent polling. But a week before the local elections, the polling was predicting a Labour majority of 168. You apply the boundary changes, which are, whether they're designed to or not, we can be cynical, but they certainly have the effect of increasing the number of Tory seats, by a few, not loads, but by a few. And yet, the same model, but with different boundaries now, with the new boundary changes, is now predicting a Labour lead of 202. So over the last couple of weeks, despite taking into account the new boundary changes, Labour have actually extended their likely lead should there be a general election right now. Now, obviously, there's not going to be a general election right now. And when there is, the Conservatives will have a much better run campaign than they had for the local elections. Although hopefully so will Labour. But that's where we are now. And this is why all this talk of hung parliaments and things, you look at this and you go, okay, so at the moment, the polling is suggesting a Labour lead of 202. It won't be that. it will, of course, the polls will narrow as we get to the actual election, but they'd have to narrow a lot. In fact, Labour would have to lose half their poll lead, more than half their poll lead, to get into hung territory. In fact, I'm thinking about it. They may need to lose virtually 2/3 of their poll lead to get into hung parliament territory. And that would include two things having to happen. First of all, Labour would have to really do something very, very silly. And second, the Conservatives would have to either be, the beneficiaries of spectacular circumstance or do something amazing. And I just don't see it. Isn't the Boundary Commission independent so the Tories can't gerrymander? Yes, but like anything else that's independent but working under the direction of the government set guidelines. There's a really great quote from Yes Minister years ago, which formed part of my initial political understanding as a young boy. And it was like, when the minister was saying, isn't such and such a thing independent? And the official said, well, yes, but trains are independent too. But if you lay the track in a certain way, that's the way they go. So although commissions like this are independent, they are genuinely independent. They don't have ministers breathing down their neck. Nonetheless, Parliament has done this, but the government has directed it. They have set the guidelines. So they could have set different guidelines. So if I get rid of this, now I go back to the summary again, they could have set guidelines that said that Scotland should be protected. Now, there are some protected constituencies, but they're pockets. They could have said Scotland should retain the number of MPs that it has. They didn't. The guidelines didn't say that. So basically what I'm saying is the government set guidelines such that they knew that even an independent commission following those guidelines would end up coming up with a model that favours the Conservatives. It was inevitable. That's the way they set the guidelines out. So it doesn't matter that the commission is independent. Their guidelines were not independently drawn up. But I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to put that one on because this is a much happier graphic. Although I do have another couple maybe later as well. Seems a bit odd that the Tories would change boundaries in favour of Labour unless it's their way of guaranteeing those. Well, they haven't changed the boundary in favour of Labour. So when I say with the boundary changes, it's gone from 168 to 202, it hasn't. It's the combination of boundary changes and the extra share. So what I'm saying is, if this modelling that's on the right were to have been done with the current boundaries, the current constituencies, the Labour lead would be even more than 202. So what has actually happened is Labour have gained in the polls over the last couple of weeks as a result of their much better campaign over the Conservatives, to the point where they have extended their lead quite substantially. And again, this shows you the power of a campaign. I would always say, be a little bit suspicious. If a poll is done every week, which most pollsters do a poll every week, if you get a massive change one week and you can't really put your finger on why it would be, it's probably a bit of an aberration. So that's why you watch the overall trend. But in an election campaign, you can see significant movement. You can absolutely see significant movement. And that is because the power of a campaign will change a lot of people's minds. Otherwise, politicians, political parties save up money for election campaigns. They really do save up a lot of money for it. And it's because they work. So they have to save up what they call a war chest. That's why the Conservatives, ahead of these local elections, got rid of a load of staff at Conservative Party headquarters. It's because they were struggling for funds, they were struggling for donations, but they needed to put every penny into the local election campaign. A local election campaign that was a waste of money, as it turned out, because it's very poorly run. But Labour ran such... and it's not like Labour were head and shoulders above everyone else in terms of the campaign. The Liberal Democrats and I could talk about the Greens in a moment. The Liberal Democrats and the Greens did incredibly well in these local elections. So you can't say that their campaign was not up to the standard of Labour's either. But the Conservatives ran a very poor campaign. And that's what this polling is highlighting, the difference. Now, it may settle down again, it may narrow a bit, but that's what the difference here is. I'm saying my constituency is a marginal seat between Tories and Labour, though we have a Labour MP, but it's predicted that Labour will hold the seat. Right, at the moment, if there's a Labour MP in any constituency, it's a pretty safe bet that they're still going to be the MP after the next election. Labour are not realistically likely to lose any seats. I'm just trying to think who has. I think Labour have the Sheffield Hallam one. The only one that the Lib Dems and Labour fight over is one in Sheffield Hallam. I think it's Labour at the moment. I'm not sure. If it is, that is one that could genuinely be up for grabs, I suppose. But any seat where it's between Labour and the Conservatives, which is almost all of them, Labour aren't going to lose that to the Conservatives. The Conservatives are, at the moment, you would think, going to lose every established marginal. And there's a good chance they'll lose some safe seats. Some of their safe seats have become marginals as well. So, Guardian's reporting that Sunak is facing a large-scale rebellion, Graham Brady to be busy again. No, not yet anyway. The party rules... First of all, bear in mind, this is just a lot of Tory rebels who are very noisy, but not many in number, right? The other thing to bear in mind is the party rules say that Rishi Sunak cannot face a confidence vote in his first year as leader. And I know you'll be saying, but they've gotten rid of their last 3 leaders when the party rules protected them and they all still were forced down. But that was because in each of those cases, Theresa May, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, Graham Brady had taken soundings and over half of the MPs in the party had said, we want the rules to change. Graham Brady made it quite clear, for example, with Liz Truss. I think he might have done it with Boris Johnson as well. But he said quite clearly he was not going to change the rules unless it was certain that the Prime Minister at the time would lose the confidence vote. Because he's not going to change the party rules just to have another confidence vote, only for the Prime Minister to win it, because then that just looks bad for the Conservatives. It just damages the party without actually resolving anything. So the same thing will apply. Graham Brady would have to be confident that in excess of 50% of Tory MPs want Sunak to step down. Only then would Sunak be in trouble. But that is not... It's certainly not going to happen before October. At the end of October, then he's been leader for a year, and then it just takes 15% of Tory MPs, and they can, if which is whatever it is, 50 something. So obviously a lot of people are going to hype it up. Yes, Graham Brady is going around talking to people because yes, some MPs have started putting letters in. Some other ones are chuntering. Of course, he's going to go. He represents backbench MPs. Of course, he's going to get soundings. But it doesn't seem credible that those soundings are going to say, yes, let's get rid of Rishi Sunak. Because who are they going to get? Who are they going to replace with? Boris Johnson? Doesn't matter what his fans think. He's a non-starter. Tory MPs know he's a non-starter. It would be absolutely catastrophic for them to bring him back. Penny Mordaunt, what? Because she held a sword? Oh, didn't she hold that sword well? Didn't she hold that sword well? What? I mean, Michael Heseltine famously picked up the ceremonial mace in the House of Commons and I think maybe threatened to lamp someone with it. No one made him Prime Minister because of that. I mean, he wanted to be made Prime Minister, but it was John Major in the end, wasn't it? You don't get made Prime Minister because of your ability to hold a weapon. At times of crisis, do we think the Tories will be turning to Dame Shirley Porter for assistance? She masterminded gerrymandering at Westminster in the 1990s, but eventually got caught. I mean, the boundary changes are sort of done. They're in the final... I don't even know which bit of the process they're in, but they're sort of settled, I think. I don't think there's any doubt now about them. They will be as they are, or as they've been proposed. Does it still remain that it takes 32,000 votes to get a Labour MP, 24,000 for a Tory? It will. We'll have to see. There's only so many boundaries change. I mean, again, if we, I'm not sure how many have actually changed. Does it tell me somewhere? Um, can't actually see. But where was I now? Yeah, the mathematics of it may change slightly in favour of the Tories, but again, it also depends on who turns out to vote. It may well be that come the next election, that Labour have the better part of that equation, because that is the way to win a general election anyway. And I'll tell you something: if Labour do get a large majority, I'm not talking 200's pie in the sky, but come the election, if they even get something like a majority of 100, that will have required Labour to win just what the Tories did last time, win a lot of seats by a small margin. So in actual fact, you may well find that after the general election, when this maths is done, it turns out to be Labour that have won MPs with the fewest number of votes per MP, because that is how you win in first past the post. Incredibly efficient concentration of your votes. So what Labour do, for example, so Labour generally do well in the cities, not so much in like the industrial town, or traditionally they do. Recently, not so well in the industrial towns, not so well in rural areas. So what Labour will be doing is largely, I'm not going to say ignoring, that's the wrong word, but not focusing their efforts on the cities. So possibly their vote share in the cities goes down, but they will still win the seats because they win those by large margins, and sneak themselves over the industrial towns and some of the rural areas, the ones that are particularly badly hit. Maybe Jacob Rees-Mogg's Norfolk seat, for example. So that's how you win first past post. So it could well be after the general election we find out that the Kings are, possibly the SNP as well. The SNP actually get a lot of MPs compared to their vote share. They're, in fact, arguably better than the Conservatives at it. But we may well find that Labour win that battle. What's all this about a Labour frontbencher being a serial sex offender still in his seat? So, so all I know is probably what you know. A Labour MP, a female Labour MP, has made an allegation of sexual assault on the part of someone in the shadow cabinet. And what she's done is she's gone to the police, which is fine. In fact, I was quite pleased that Labour's official... Usually when this happens, the political party's official response would be, well, we have our own systems, they should have engaged in that. Now, I was quite pleased that at least Labour said, you know, in situations like this, they said that the Labour Party has an independent process, which it is. You can also go through the parliamentary process, or you could go to the police. So Labour did actually say that this MP is perfectly within a right to go to the police. And in actual fact, if you are going to be the victim of sexual assault or any form of harassment, then you should obviously take it up with whatever channel you feel most comfortable. We don't really have any clues other than it's supposed to be someone whose star is rising. That's all we know. I mean, that could be several, because over the last few years, several people have gone from obscurity to significant positions in Labour's leadership because they've been sort of crowded out in the previous years. So we'll just have to, at the end of the day, the police are investigating that. It is the Met Police, unfortunately, who don't seem to have, they don't seem to be fully seized of the notion of why sexual harassment's a bad thing, let's face it. But given that in this particular case, the Met Police are not being asked to investigate their own, so there's no fortress mentality. They're also not being asked to investigate a Tory MP. So, you know, I think we've got as much confidence as we can that it will be properly investigated. And we'll just have to wait and see. Hopefully everyone will have the correct ID this time. We need a concerted effort to get young people equipped with the correct ID so that even the bloody minder can't turn them away. Or postal voting. One or the other. Encourage people to get the ID or to do postal voting. And also, the other thing to remind people about, if they have postal voting, apply for it again. Because there's another change coming in I almost forgot about in terms of voter suppression. So it was previously the case, So the way if you want postal voting, you live in an area, you want a postal vote, you send off a form to the council saying, I would like postal voting, please. You do all that, you get put on the register. That's it. Every election that happens then, whether it's for a general election, a local election, police and crime commissioner, mayor, whatever it is, you will then get sent a postal ballot. And it's up to you what you do with it. You can use it as a postal vote. You can put it in an envelope and post it. Or if you're going to be free on the day of the ballot, you can take it down to the polling station with you and cast it in the normal way. That's fine. It's up to you. But that's not going to be the case, because another change coming in, it's coming in this autumn as well, before the general election, is that postal votes will be time limited. So if you applied for a postal vote 3 years later, you're no longer on the postal vote register. And I don't know that you're going to be sent any letters telling you that it's lapsed and do you want to be put back on it. So I would just suggest that not now, but come next year, well, maybe now actually, as soon as possible. But I would just suggest, even if people have a postal vote, early next year, just reapply for it, just to make sure or just check with the council that you're still on it and will still be on it for the rest of next year. If not, just apply for it again, because they're pulling every trick they can and not informing people as well. If Labour win lots of seats at the next general election by small majorities, should they push through PR in the first term in case many of them are lost when they return to the polls? No. Now, unfortunately, the thing with PR is, I've said before, strategically. So we do not know at all, never mind what they've said, we have no idea whether the Labour leadership actually wants to implement PR at any time. We know that they're not going to do it in the next Parliament. We know that. But will they do it at some point? I really hope so. But I don't know. But what I would say is, let us say Keir Starmer's thinking to himself, I'm going to bring PR in. I'm just not going to tell anyone yet. He wouldn't do it in the first Parliament anyway, because if he did, that means the first time he's defending an election, he will technically lose, because he's not going to get the 55% needed to form a stable government. So, or he's very unlikely to. He'd have to really pull it out of the bag to do that. I suppose it's possible, but it's unlikely. And he wants to get I've said this before, he wants to get his reforms in. So if I were a Labour strategist, I would say you don't implement proportional representation. They're not going to anyway, that's quite clear. They have made that clear at least. You don't implement proportional representation, but you put it in your second manifesto. And you leave it as late as possible to even announce it, but you put it in your second manifesto. So then what happens is, so you win the election, you get a nice healthy majority. So then you start implementing the reforms, and there's a lot of reforms to implement. But one parliamentary term is not enough to get them all in. There's a lot to do. So then what you do is, 4 years down the line, you're looking good for another win. So then you say, but at this point, hopefully the House of Lords reform has been done. Right, we've reformed the House of Lords, we reformed this, we've done this, we've given more power back to the people. Now it's time to take it up to the next level. We are going to introduce proportional representation. So then what you do is you put it in your manifesto. So then in, say, 2028, they go into the polls again. And a lot of Liberal Democrat, because for the next election, there's probably going to be a lot of Liberal Democrat and Green supporters voting Labour to kick the Tories out. They may or may not still do the same thing at the following election. They may get complacent and not do it to the same extent. So what Labour do, say PR for that manifesto, Lib Dem and Green voters then go, right, we'll vote for Labour one last time, then we can vote for whoever we like. And Lib Dem and Greens will then get more MPs, right? So they might even get some Reform UK supporters doing it, because Reform UK would benefit from PR. In fact, Nigel Farage has talked positively in terms of PR. He wants it. Of course he does. He can become an MP then. So then Labour get a bit of a boost, which returns them another large majority. Because if they keep with first past the post, it's very likely that in the next election, the second election, they will lose some MPs, as you say. They've got a smaller majority. Maybe it's then more difficult to get stuff through. This should give them a second term of a very large majority. Then what they can do, they've got, they might as well use the 5 years as well. They've got those 5 years to implement the rest of the reforms. And I'm sorry, if in 8 or 9 years you cannot implement all the reforms you need to do, then what are you playing at? So they've had the time to implement all the reforms. Then in your third election, it's proportional representation. Maybe by this point, people are sort of, thinking, oh, is Labour really doing all that well? And maybe voting for some others. It won't matter, because the Conservatives will not win 50% of the vote, which means, nor will the Conservatives plus Reform UK together, none of the ones that might work together. So inevitably what you end up with is a situation where you need a coalition that will have to include Labour. And at that point, you'd go, okay, Labour can't necessarily just forge ahead with all their reforms in their own way, because the Lib Dems and the Greens probably will have a say. But that's fine, because they'll have implemented all their major reforms, and they can then find common areas of interest to work on more progress. That's how I would do it. That is how I would do it. And that is also what I hope they will do. Because whatever reforms Labour bring in, if the Conservatives come back, and Labour cannot really, even if they do really well, they mustn't bank on more than 2 general election wins in a row. They really mustn't do that. But I think it'll also be maybe leaving it a bit late if they waited for the third election to announce PR. But that's what I would say about that. Can first past the post technically result in an election where a party wins 40% of the votes but not a single seat in Parliament? If not likely, but we're talking about unlikely technicalities here. Mathematically, yes, but only realistically in a 2-party system, which we don't. I mean, I know there's only ever 2 parties that can form the government, but we have much more than a 2-party system. So realistically, it would not at all happen, no. Mathematically, you could make a model where it did it, but it's a bit like Ptolemy making a model of the solar system where the Earth was at the centre. He sort of made it work mathematically, but it was never going to work in practice. Starmer said he was taking the party to further than where Blair took the party, and he doesn't care if he sounds like a Conservative. Where do the left and progressive voters go? Right. You've at least not misquoted what Starmer said as badly as I've seen some people today. What Starmer said is that the reforms he is going to implement go further than New Labour's reforms, which they do. But look at what those reforms are. It's making sure that decision-making, a lot more decision-making takes place away from Westminster, for example. It includes in terms of public services, they are moves towards nationalisation, which of course Labour didn't touch under Tony Blair at all. So all he's saying is, he's not saying he's doing the same as Tony Blair but further. What he's saying is that the reforms are going to be on a larger scale than they were under New Labour, is what he said. And when he says he doesn't care if it sounds like a Conservative, I really feel I ought to read the quote out, because, again, people are reading accounts of it, but not what he actually... Here we go. Right, let me have a go. Oh, the further than New Labour as well was specifically in terms of reforming the Labour Party as well as the country, bear in mind. Where did he say about the thing? Here it is. So he was talking about when he was talking about he was talking about the Conservatives. Now, I've said in the past that these Conservatives are not at all Conservative in that they're not conserving anything. Keir Starmer's just saying the same thing. He says, and I quote, talking about the Conservative Party, "It conserves nothing we value, not our rivers, and C's, not our NHS or BBC, not our families, not our nation. And then he said, we must understand there are precious things in our way of life, in our environment, in our communities, that it is our responsibility to protect and preserve and to pass on to future generations. And if that sounds conservative, let me tell you, I don't care. So I don't really see how people go from Keir Starmer saying that he wants to conserve our way of life, our environment, our communities, the BBC, the NHS, families, the nation, rivers and seas, and they take from that, oh, he's a Tory, he's saying he's a Tory. It's like, behave yourself. But this has happened now on at least 3 occasions in the past week. And again, I'll point you to the polls again. This happens every time Labour are doing well in the polls. The people on the right, who you can understand attacking Labour, but also on the hard left who want to attack Labour, they all of a sudden pump out the propaganda. And they'll say, oh, Keir Starmer said this. No, he didn't. Oh, he did. No, he didn't. Oh, here's a clip. Yeah, I've listened to it. Didn't. You know, like they said, David Lammy said he wouldn't repeal the Public Order Act. And you listen to it and it's like, no, he didn't say that. Oh, now Keir Starmer's saying it. No, he didn't. But anyway. Keir Starmer and the establishment coup. I shall tell you something. I mean, see, I'm quite comfortable with this because Labour, they're not going to lose because the people who are currently briefing against Labour have been briefing against Labour ever since Starmer took the leadership. And they haven't affected the polls in the slightest. And they're not going to over the next year. So the people who are coming up with this nonsense are not going to change the election result next year. The only thing that can change the election result from where it currently stands is you'd expect a bit of natural change towards the Conservatives anyway, because there'll still be a lot of Conservative voters who are not really sure, so they're not showing up in the polls. I think more of them have come back under Rishi Sunak. I think that's fair to say. But there's probably still another pool of don't know Conservative voters who will, come the election, go, hold my nose, vote for the Tories. But for Labour to now lose this election, they have to do something strategically. They need a real blunder. And even something like, for example, a member of the front bench. It's not necessarily the front bench, by the way. We just know they're in the shadow cabinet. They may not be... or is it shadow cabinet or is it just a shadow minister? I don't even know if it's someone in the shadow cabinet. But as long as Labour deal with it properly, doesn't matter who it is, as long as at the point at which if the police decide that there needs to be an investigation, as long as they're removed from their position, the whip withdrawn, as would automatically happen anyway, as long as the independent processes kick in and they don't try and shield them, that won't matter. Labour are on for a win. And all I would say is when they've got that majority, I'm comfortable just to sit back. I'm a patient person at times. I'm comfortable to sit back, and then about 3 years down the line, I will be quite happy to do several videos a week with my I told you so banner, just like I used when Brexit happened. I'm quite happy for that because if it were the case that some of these people held sway over a lot of undecided voters and could, their propaganda could tip the election, then I'd be more concerned. But it's not. At the end of the day, I even tried on Twitter today, someone was saying, Labour are basically a moderate right-wing government. They're going to be a moderate right-wing government as somehow just not as bad as the Tories. And I said, name me a single right-wing policy that Labour have. Like, name me one. And I got several people trying to jump in on it. None of them were able to name one. One of them gave it a go, but then he named a load of things that were not actually Labour policies. So then I directed them towards the actual Labour policies. But that's what's happening. So at the moment you're going, oh, Labour are going to be right-wing. It's like, name me a right-wing policy. And then when you trap them on that, because they can't, So then inevitably, as part of that conversation, you explain what some of their actual policies are, which they didn't know about because they're reading tanky news. And then they go, well, I don't trust Labour to implement it. And it's like, well, if you don't trust Labour to implement a particular policy, why are you moaning about their policies? How does it? It's like, oh, I don't like Labour because they don't have this policy. Then you say they actually do have that policy. Oh, well, they won't put it in place. Like, these people, there's nothing you can do with these people other than to wait. It's the same with Brexit. It's exactly the same with Brexit. I'm still waiting for a Brexiteer to give me a tangible benefit of Brexit. I'm still waiting for the hard Brexiteers to give me just one rule or regulation that would be axed as a result of the the retained EU law bill that is in our interest to get rid of. And in actual fact, to back up their argument, they'd need to be able to do this for hundreds. But you don't get it. So all you can do is you just have to wait it out. When Brexiteers, before we actually Brexited, said, oh, you don't know these things are going to happen, there came a point where you just had to say, well, it's going to happen now anyway, so we'll just have to wait. Oh, look, it happened. And it's the same thing here. People saying, and there will be some things that they don't get right. Don't get me wrong. There will be policies that they don't get quite right because some of them are going to meet a lot of resistance. Abolishing the House, it's not reforming the House of Lords. They're going to abolish the House of Lords. That's what they're actually going to do. They're going to replace it with a chamber that does the same job as well as some other jobs, but the House of Lords is gone within a few years of a Labour government. That is going to meet a lot of resistance. And, but all I can do is just say, for people who will say Labour should have this policy, and when I say they do, or they have one that is actually better, then they go, but they won't do it. It's like, well, don't matter what they promise to do then, is it, if you don't believe them? So you just have to wait. You just wait 3 years and then go. Why can't people lift themselves into the middle class? Mondeo man didn't want another Mondeo. They wanted to have a BMW. Nah, BMWs are rubbish. Actually, they're not rubbish, but I wouldn't want to have one. I don't like the idea of anyone aspiring to different classes anyway, because the class system shouldn't exist. So I always sort of prefer just to talk about social mobility. People, if everyone had equal opportunities in life, then there would be no such thing as the class system. And of course, the way to do that is to make sure that everyone has the same standard of schooling. So ideally, no private schools. Everyone has the same standard of healthcare. Everyone has the same job opportunities. Wouldn't it be funny if Starmer became Prime Minister and suddenly revealed himself as more Marxist than Bevan? The thing is, Keir Starmer is actually very far to the left in terms of his personal politics. People make the assumption that all of Starmer's policies are Starmer's policies. They're not. They're the policies that will... There's a Venn diagram. There are policies that he believes are going to make the country better. And then there are policies that people will vote for. And what he has to do is he has to form a coherent programme of legislation from the crossover. Because if it's something that he feels will make the country better, but that voters won't vote for it, he can't do it. He won't have the support. And if he tries to do it, even if he wins the next election, he'll lose the one after. He'll lose the one after. If at the same time, if he tries to pick something from the yes, voters will vote for this, but he doesn't believe it will make the country better, you can pick the odd one, but bear in mind, every policy you have, you need to implement. Otherwise, the right-wing press will crucify you, with a few exceptions. And so you have to implement it, and that takes time and resources. So really, you need to try and focus where that crossover is. So that's all he's done. It's not his policies. It's the ones that he feels will make the country better and that he can win an election with. And you have to have both. Will the Lords all be on the streets with protest placards? They could be arrested with Tory protest bill. That would be interesting. Yeah, I mean, I suspect they don't because, of course, people who have to stand on a street with a placard are just ordinary people. People who can get to go and cry on GB News because Alistair Campbell called them a liar, they don't need a placard. They just go on telly and whine about it. So all of these lords, former lords, if they want, can go and cry on the news about it. With the House of Lords gone, would Labour go as far as renationalising the aristocracy? No, France did that. It was quite messy. We don't do that these days. A lot of them sort of tend to lose money anyway. I mean, the reason why we've got so many stately homes belonging to the National Trust is because the family that owned them couldn't afford the upkeep anyway. Most aristocrats aren't even that wealthy. So there's a small number that are exceedingly wealthy. But there you go. They've confirmed reformation of universal credit, yet not abolition. Yes, I saw that. But again, something like that, we'll wait and see where that goes. You can easily reform it by effectively abolishing it. Because by definition, if you create a different approach for different groups of people, like, for example, if disabled people, it's a fundamentally different approach to someone who's just out of work, then all of a sudden, even if you call it universal credit, you've basically abolished it anyway, in terms of what universal credit was intended to be. Given the state of our education, would Labour benefit by returning schools to local authority control? Mean these academies paying their heads ridiculous salaries at the cost of books? Well, the worst thing about academies is not so much paying the heads. They tend to get like normal wages by and large. It's what happens is, so the way an academy trust works, so a private group runs academies, right? They have schools, they buy into them, sort of thing. And they're non-profit makers. They're not allowed to make a profit, okay? But that's easy. So what you do, let's say you own one of these trusts. You're the head of this charitable organisation that has several schools. What you do is you make yourself a consultant and you pay yourself 400 grand a year. There's the profit. It's in the form of a salary that you take from the school's budget. Not one school. I mean, you won't get 400 grand from one school's budget, but, you know, if you have a collection of schools within your academy trust, then you and a few mates can make yourselves consultants. You go around pretending to be managers and pop into the schools, have a little visit. Oh, how's it going? Oh, great. Thank you very much. And then, you know, you draw your massive salary at the end of it. So, yeah, I don't specifically know what they've got in mind in terms of the academisation of schools, but the general idea of removing lots of power from Westminster where it's not necessary would suggest that they may in time revert schools and colleges back to local authority control. Certainly, yeah. But there isn't a specific policy on that I know of. And again, remember how much can realistically be done in 4 or 5 years. And all they can promise in their manifesto is what they can get done in basically 4 years, because you always try and go to the polls in 4 years. And what you really don't want to do is when you go for an election after 4 years is to say, oh yeah, we didn't do that bit of the manifesto, but that's because we're calling an election a year early, because then people will say, well, why are you calling it a year early? Why don't you finish the job, then call it? If you call an early election, you always have to be able to claim that you've done the job and now it's time for a new mandate. Because we know the reason why a party of government will have an election after 4 years. It's because they don't want something to go wrong in the 5th year and then they've run out of road. So you aim for 4 years, and then if things look a bit ropey, then you can extend it to the 5th year and hope for the best. But if you deliberately wait 5 years, then anything can happen. Banking crisis or anything. So we know that's the real reason, but they can't admit that. So what they have to say is instead, we have completed the manifesto, we've done everything. Now we need to present our next stage, our next phase of our grand plan to the public. That's the reason you have to give. So you basically have to make sure your manifesto can be done in 4 years. How on earth do the Tories expect to ever have power again if they allow employers to remove workers' rights? Will this come to fruition before Labour have the chance to form a government? Yes. The plan is still to remove a crap load of rules and regulations by the end of this year. They are paying a legal firm millions of pounds, but I mean, that's a drop in the ocean compared to their normal waste, to basically work out which ones they can get away with getting rid of, essentially. So yes, this is still almost certain to happen at the end of this year. We are still almost certain to see hundreds of rules and regulations, including some workers' rights, instantly removed. But what I would say is this: Labour have already promised to introduce, they're going to repeal all the anti-strike legislation the Tories have brought in over the last few years, including the stuff that's currently going through Parliament at the moment. But they've also talked about the Employment Rights Bill, and all of this is going to be done in the first 100 days. So that is their top priority: repealing anti-strike laws and a bill of workers' rights. And obviously, any rights that are removed as part of the retained EU law bill, I am going to guess, are going to be added straight into this Employment Rights Bill that Labour then introduce in their first 3 months. So although, yes, I expect workers' rights to be adversely affected before the general election, I think Labour will reinstate them all, as well as add the ones they're already intending to add with the the Employment Rights Bill. Is there any data on how well Labour do in keeping their manifesto promises? I don't think no, I think you'd have to go through it yourself, although also bear in mind, the reason it probably doesn't exist is because unless you've got an ulterior motive, they're not that valuable, because the last 3 Labour manifestos to be implemented were implemented by Tony Blair, who's not even part of the Labour leadership now, let alone the leader. So it wouldn't necessarily make any difference anyway. But what you will generally find is that Labour will basically implement almost all of it. PR was the big bollock drop from the last Labour government. They should have done that, and they didn't. But generally speaking, they will. And the reason for that is because if they don't, the Tory press will be right onto it. No messing about. They'll cover for the Conservatives. They will never cover for Labour. So Labour have to. And more than that, see, the Conservatives can sometimes also get away if they implement something with like a technical implementation. Labour don't even get away with that. They have to implement it and make sure people feel that it's been implemented. Because again, the Tory press, the Tory press don't ever go, oh, they've implemented it, oh, fair enough, fair play. They'll still work out some way of trying to suggest that Labour haven't actually done what they promised, even if they have. So Labour have to make sure it's really obvious to people. If it was, I mean, there's different types of manifesto promise. There are the ones that the Labour believe are in the best interest of people, and then there are the ones that you're really forming your campaign, your election campaign on. Those ones you absolutely have to do, and you have to do them quite quickly. Could Starmer be priming the UK average voter for a switch to the left, policy-wise, than if he has a second term push further left? The thing is, it is actually an incredibly slow process to nudge people's behaviours. You can do it. We've seen it done. We've seen members of the public, for example, harden their attitudes towards certain things. Although, ironically, what's happened since the Conservatives have been in charge is people now, I think there was some polling out last month or the month before that showed that people are now more in favour of immigration than they were when the Tories came to power. But it does take a long time. But what I would say is this: the public are already centre left, not very left, of course, but centre left anyway. And you know what? The Conservatives know it. Do you know that Andrew Neil has written a piece for the Daily Mail? Or it may be the Mail on Sunday, I don't know. I've read the online version. So I think it might have been in today's Daily Mail. But he's written a piece for the Mail. And do you know what? He's attacking PR, by the way. He's attacking the concept of proportional representation. And do you know why he says proportional representation's bad? He says it's because it would create left-wing governments. So what Andrew Neil is basically saying is he is of the belief that most voters side with left-wing rather than right-wing policies. And there's another thing I could say to back that up as well. If you look at the Conservatives are clearly a right-wing party. They say as much. They don't mind saying that. They call themselves the very far left, the far right, Conservative government we have right now. They have the nerve to call themselves centre-right. I mean, they're anything but they have no problems describing themselves as right-wing, right? And yet, look at what they promise. 40 new hospitals. Is that a right-wing policy? That's not a right-wing policy. A right-wing policy would be to allow planning permission for 40 new private hospitals, wouldn't it? But no, the government, we're going to use taxes to pay for 40 new hospitals. Obviously, they didn't because although they will advertise left-wing policies, they won't do them, but they'll have them. Now, why would they have left-wing policies like that or 350 million quid a week extra for the NHS? Why would they do things like that if not for the fact they know that they need to attract some voters who are effectively left-wing? So they offer left-wing policies. And it's because, although most voters are grouped around the centre, there's more that are a bit to the left than there are a bit to the right. Colin. Might finish with this one. It says, when your country is so far right on the Overton window, the answer to your question is obviously yes. Have I missed a thing here? So the Overton window, for people who don't know, is... So I was talking before, for example, about the Venn diagram thing with the crossover between policies that you think are good for the country and ones that people vote for. The Overton window is basically the policies that voters will vote for, that they will generally approve of. And it does move. So the Overton window, where it is now, it's basically all the policies that you can actually credibly win an election with. And it's not like you can have different... Some of them are left-wing and some are right-wing. It's not like they're all of a particular place. But it does encompass certain things that the public will go along with. And if you try and implement any policies outside of what's called the Overton window, they are always going to be vote negative. So it doesn't... And this is where the last Labour leadership went badly wrong, strategically wrong, because they failed to understand that or they didn't believe it. And they thought, well, this is what's best for the country, so we'll do this. And it's like, yeah, that might be right, but voters don't believe it, so they're not going to vote for it. And they didn't vote for it, lo and behold. So you have to push the Overton window. And why one of the reasons why the Conservatives always do much better, apart from the 100% back in the media, but it's partly related to that as well, is they are quite happy to offer everything. We're going to do it all. We're gonna fund world-leading public services, but we're not gonna charge you extra taxes for it. But Labour, so what they say is Labour will. So what they do is they basically make the same offer on public services to Labour. They say we will deliver public services that are just as good as Labour would, but or in fact they actually usually say even better. But we won't put your taxes up, but Labour will. Whereas the reality is always that the public services are worse under the Conservatives and your taxes are higher. There it is. Conservative Home must see the writing on the wall. PR is needed to join the EU. This is one of the reasons why... There's several reasons why people on the right wing would be, or a lot of people on the right wing, not everyone, would be dead against PR. Mostly it is realistically because... It's not that you freeze the Conservatives out of power forever. Of course you don't. They will adapt and they will come back. And you will see in the future Liberal Democrat, Reform UK, Conservative coalitions, for example. But it will not be possible for a narrow fringe extreme of politics to have over half the MPs in Parliament. That's where it works, as well as the fact it allows people to vote for who they want to vote for. So there's the democratic impetus there. But just from a practical point of view, the Conservatives can absolutely win power with PR, but they will share it with someone else, and their swivel-eyed loon fringe will not be allowed anywhere near the decision-making process. Or if they are, they'll just be allowed a few minor nods. They'll not be allowed to dictate the government's agenda because they won't have enough MPs supporting them. But there are other issues as well. Inevitably, yes, our current political system is not suitable for any application to rejoin the EU either. But there it is. Could Labour find a way to force Rothmere to sell the Mail and Mirror? Easy. Yeah. I say easy. Ironically, I talked about this one, that video I've done with Graham. He's going to put on Labour Social when he's edited it, which may be a couple of weeks away. They can just ban foreign ownership of the media. Now, they can't just do that in one fell swoop, because my concern with that, I'll make this my last point, my concern with that is that you'd all of a sudden have like no newspapers, or you'd have hardly any newspapers. And there'll be some people thinking, well, good, we'll only have the decent ones left. It's like, yeah, but the public won't see it that way, will they? The public, the public do buy the Daily Mail and the Sun and the Mirror and publications like this and the Telegraph. And, to suddenly wipe them out overnight will look like an attack on the press. It will be billed as an attack on the free press, and it will be hard to argue against it. So I think Labour will have to move towards it slowly, bit by bit, but ultimately moving towards basically making it more uncomfortable. I would begin by making it uncomfortable for a foreign owner to manage UK media, maybe restrict the number of titles they can have, things like that. But eventually, just like with smoking, just like the way governments have changed the law on smoking, bit by bit, to the point where very few people now, or relatively few people, smoke in this country. Do the same thing with foreign ownership of the media. Just little by little, make it less of an incentive to own media whilst living outside the country. How would you implement a ban on foreign ownership of media? I would begin by restricting well, first of all, just do a review, get an actual expert to come up with the ideas, not just me thinking off the top of my head. But you could restrict the number of titles they can have, so they're forced to sell some. And then you can restrict it further a few years later. Then you can eventually move to the position where, or you can apply bigger taxes. Maybe you have bigger taxes for foreign-owned media. Eh? How about that? Charge them 80% tax. Foreign ownership tax. Foreign ownership tax just for the media. So many things you could do. But make it uncomfortable. Make it uncomfortable for them, is what I would say. And then, as they sell off a few titles, so they'll sell off their losses because they're paying through the nose to support one that's not that good. Sell it off, and then eventually they've not got that many, then just get rid of the whole thing. Have I read the Anthony Seldon's Boris book? No, I haven't. No. I've seen the usual snippets that other people have. Nothing in it surprises me that I've seen so far. Nothing in it surprises me. But there we go. Foreign ownership levy, exactly. But for media companies, I wouldn't say for all companies, we don't need to destroy our economy overnight. But the media, I haven't got a problem with. But there we go. We'll call it there. Thanks very much for coming on. Have a good evening, everyone. We're back again next week. Until next time, I'll see you later.